Alrighties, hello everyone. My name's Nat and welcome to Thursday's webinar. Each week we deliver engaging edutainment that helps people understand their brain better. And this week we are looking at neurodivergent leadership and well-being. Now, being a leader is never easy, but being a neurodiverse leader, while it comes with a heap load of benefits, it also comes with a lot of challenges. And we're going to be looking at today how you can be a better leader, avoid burnout, and help to utilize your brain better. Now, a lot of the tips we're going to mention today, pretty much all of them would benefit anyone, regardless of their neurodiversity, but it's a particular focus today on those who might have an additional thing to consider, whether benefit, not benefit, or depending on the day. So as I mentioned, my name is Nat. I'm the head of community at Exceptional Individuals, a small social enterprise. And myself, I'm neurodiverse and in a position of leadership. And a lot of my team are neurodiverse and in a position of leadership. So you're in good hands. And with that, let's get started. While we are predominantly focusing on dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and ADHD, we are essentially focusing on the whole breadth of thinking differently. I normally like to explain thinking differently as swimming upstream. It is absolutely doable. If you do it long enough, it's going to get you nice and strong, but you are going to get tired and you do suffer from burnout. So being neurodiverse has many benefits and many challenges. And there's an interesting thing where they say 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic. Now, is that a coincidence? Probably not, because that out-of-the-box thinking does allow you to get to the top. But there's a lot of people who are neurodiverse who are not like billionaires. Why? Because it's tough out there. And that is another thing we're going to be looking at today. Here's our lovely team. Half of them have now left the company, which is awkward, but I will get their pictures removed soon. But we still got myself. We've still got April in the chat. We got Matt, we got Tim, we got Kinga, we got Danny, Sylvia, and Tim, and a few others. Now, our last webinar that we did last week, because we deliver these every single week for those who do not normally attend, was on Neuro Myths, debunking the brain. There's a lot of hoo-ha that gets said about the brain, which is absolutely garbage. So we went through it and we thought, true, not true, might be true, could be true, possibly true, but not absolutely true, and kind of decoded it that way. Now we're going to be thinking about what other things we know to be true and how can we use that in order to better ourselves? How can I support my line manager and colleagues to compassionately frame struggling colleagues may have? Well, though we're not tackling that one head on today, I think education is always the best thing from both sides. So having a basic awareness of how your own mind works, and as well as a team to appreciate that diversity is a natural part of being human, not an oddity or something we need to cure. And hopefully today's session is going to be really hitting home that. So neurodivergent leadership and well-being. Now, when we talk about neurodivergent, we're talking about having a different way of processing information to the majority of the population. But ultimately, everyone thinks differently. So this is why a lot of these top tips and tricks will really benefit everyone. Now, we are taking many different sources today, but one of them that we're predominantly going to be looking at is Neuroscience for Leadership. Now, I study neuroscience, hence why a lot of these talks are on neuroscience. And we took a lot of this learnings and we thought, okay, what ones can relate to neurodivergence and which ones are just generic? So this is how we kind of been picking and choosing. All right, so first question, where is a cutoff between thoughts and feelings and physical sensations like being cold, hungry, or tired? Like, is there a part of the body where it swaps between your thoughts and the part of the brain which interprets the physical sensation? So if there is pot, just put a little dot on it at the part where you think, yep, this is like the cutoff point from the brain thinking to the body feeling. All right. Oh, they're coming in fast. Oh, I am neurodivergent line manager leader. How do I? How do I use neurodivergence / neurodiversity? I don't think they were interchangeable. Oh, okay, good question. Well, neurodiversity is just the umbrella term for diversity of thought. Everyone thinks differently. Neurodivergent is someone who thinks significantly different. So some people say it's semantics, but there is an actual difference. So I can see a lot of you have put them all up. Some of you say it's the brain, some say it's the neck. I'm supposing that's like the brain cord. Others say around the heart. Truth is, there isn't a cutoff point. And this is the important thing to think. A lot of people think our brain's up here, and this is the only place which does all the lovely calculations. No, you got your kind of brain cord, like goes run all the way down your body, every part of you. Though the brain is the hub, every part of your body is processing. Every part is feeling. Every part, it's all of you. So do not think that I only need to look after my brain. You need to look after the whole body. And you also can't just look after the body. You also need to look after the brain. Everything is interconnected. And that is going to be really important. Next question is, are you a lefty or a righty when it comes to the type of brain you are? Now, those of you who attended previous webinars will know that this isn't a thing. It's completely made up. But it's a question that a lot of people ask all the time. Like, all right, so if you're a left brain thinker, you're very analytical. If you're right, you're really creative. But when people say neurodiverse people, typically they say, oh, we're all creative. We're all kind of like right brain thinkers or left brain thinkers. And they try to kind of put you in a box. Now, this isn't true, like I just said, but why isn't it true? And we'll explain that, and it will help you realize that if you put all your energy into just putting your creativity and not focusing on the analytical side, you're not getting the best out of your brain, and vice versa. Oh, loads of questions. I refer to I am neurodiverse. Wouldn't it be I am neurodivergent? Everybody is neurodiverse. Yes, that's correct. So if you are neurodivergent, you are also neurodiverse. But if you are neurodiverse, you're not necessarily neurodivergent. So yeah, absolutely. Actually, lots of questions. I'll probably come back to these if that's okay. Oh, Ari, previous question. Create neurodivergent champions at work so that people feel okay with coming out as employer, others by coming to a D person. Okay. Oh, I mean, some of these questions I will have to come back to because they're really good. Now, as I said, are we left brain or right brain? This will hopefully put it into a bit more context. So are the brain hemispheres connected? Yes or no? Okay, we've got most people saying yes. Anyone saying no? Oh, one person said no, just for the hell of it. It is yes, they are connected. So we've got one hemisphere, we've got two hemisphere, and we like to think of them as like separate entities. You're either right hemisphere or left hemisphere. They are connected. And if you see here, we always see this image, you see they're kind of fanning out here. They aren't two separate things. They are the same. So information in one goes to the other. They go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is why you can't really, like, if you're kind of doing an art project, it's not like only one part of the brain is doing the calculations in order for you to do what you need to do. It is both sides of the brain. Hence why every part of the brain is important, and we shouldn't just focus on one area. A way you could look at this is by putting it in like a real life context. So you got your finance team and your marketing team. Now, how much do they work together? They are, of course, very different departments. But are they completely isolated? Do they work side by side? Or do they have a knock-on effect on each other? And this is very similar to the brain because, yes, they have a knock-on effect on each other. Now, they don't do the same job. And again, if you're doing finance, you don't have to have that, you don't need to like use that creative side, but you do have to take it into consideration. You do have to relay back and forth. You can't be completely separate islands. And this is very much how the brain works. There are certain parts, like for instance, certain activities will utilize different parts of the brain more heavily, but it doesn't mean that they're not using other parts of the brain at all. Now, there's a really famous example of a person called Phineas Cage who got a big pole through his eye, and he was still alive. He was walking around, but his personality had changed because the part of the brain that he got lost wasn't essential for living, but it was essential for other elements which weren't immediately clear at the beginning. Now, here is a nice image of a brain, and I think it shows a really good example of how we is all connected. If you see all these lines, every part of the brain is so connected. Every single part is important. And as a neurodiverse person, our brains are wired like in a way which our world wasn't really designed for. Hence why there's difficulties, but it's absolutely natural and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just working against the tide of society, which normally creates the challenges. So which way of thinking do you connect with the most? So these are some ways of thinking which are normally grouped together. So you might be a more physical person in terms of like how you like to process information. You might be more motivated by motivation. You might be more emotion-led. You might act on your intuition, which is like, yep, my gut is saying that. You might be more logical based or more creative. All right. So we got a lot of intuition. Nice. A lot of you are reckless, but that can be a good thing. Logic. Nice. Using the old noggin. We've got emotions, creativity. So let's quick gauge on the questions. How can neurodiverse employees progress to leadership if they struggle with identifying with potential neurotypical employees? Difficult, but possible. I would probably say to that, it's again about both parties having an understanding. It's essentially like you're talking two different languages and you have to find a way which works for both parties. You can't put all the emphasis on either the neurodiverse person or their like leadership team. It has to work both ways. Do you have to identify? Well, in this one, kind of yes, but in real life, no. In real life, it's a mixture of all things, but we do have like preferences. So our brain, while for instance, you are not a logical thinker, full stop, you will say have a preference towards one or the other. And as a leader, leaders normally show preferences to certain styles. So some leaders will go a more emotive route. Some will be more intuition, others will be more logic based. So this more relates to the style that a leader might choose to take rather than something which sums you up 100%. So let's look at physicality first. Now, this is all about listening to your messages from your body. Now, as a neurodiverse person, do you think that you're particularly in charge of your own body? Like, are you able to do like a body check and say, yep, I'm feeling a bit nervous today, I'm feeling happy, I'm got a bit of aching and pain? How are you when it comes to processing that? So here are some questions which can help you know if you're able to check your body. So for instance, do you experience regular chest pains? Do you often have that butterfly feeling? Do you often get goosebumps on your arms? Do you often sweat when not being physical? So these are all things which, if you are very aware of yourself, you will notice. Some people are not so aware. And unfortunately, for a lot of people who say might have autism, they might while they might have hypersensitivity, you can also have a reduced sensitivity as well. It can go both ways. So for some people, you might be having that chest pain, and that chest pain is your brain saying, warning, warning, you should probably stop doing what you're doing because it's not going well for you. Some people don't get that warning signal, and that's something to be mindful of. Other people will get that heightened warning sound. So they'll always have that butterfly feeling like, oh, I'm not so sure about this, and actually no danger at all. But if your body's working correctly, these kind of signals are a reason why you should act. There's like loads of examples of bankers who are like super stressed. I don't know why, maybe like embezzling money or something, but they're stressed and they're having heart attacks on the floor. They're literally just like dying on the spot. And this has happened a fair few times. It's because in a high pressure job, you're in tech, big boys don't cry, man up, just stop being a wuss. And all these signals of kind of stress, burnout are just ignored. And eventually the body is like, it's doing warning signs and people aren't listening to them. And damn. And that unfortunately can be related to neurodivergence quite heavily because we are masking, we are having to swim up the river all day long. And our body is often telling us that, whoa, we need to slow down. but a lot of people do not listen. So in order to be a good leader, you have to be good at listening to your body and take it serious. Yes, the rest of the world may not always understand, but these signals aren't coming from nowhere. It is your body's way of saying, hey, listen up. Okay, the next one is looking at motivation as a type of leadership style. Now, in order for this, you have to know what motivates you and what demotivates you. So, open question to everyone. Are there some things that you know, like what is that carrot that you like to chase? I don't know. For me, I like building up to something. You know, the journey is exciting. The destination, not so much. Demotivates me, I guess, being taken for granted. You know, there's lots of things which you can understand. Oh, okay. While I'm waiting for those, I'll read a question. How can neurodiverse employees progress up leadership position? Okay, I kind of answered that one. How do we know if we are left/right brained? Have you not been listening? There is no such thing. We are not left brained. We are not right brained. It is a common myth, but we might have a preference to more creative activities, but creativity can happen in right and left. And you might be more analytical focused, like maths, but again, happens in both sides of the brain. Oh, I know I have unmet needs at work. I regularly work later than I should and I burn out. I have difficulties identifying my needs to be able to ask for change. How do you recommend I figure this out? I mean, that is kind of what today's all about, to be honest. It's that knowing that we have unmet needs, our body doing these warning signals and us just ignoring them. And eventually they build up. So for instance, you're stressed because work is too much. So you work in the evenings and that means you're fine the next day, but you're more tired, you're more drained, you haven't had that time to relax like your other peers, and it eventually does burn out. So what I would recommend is kind of what we're doing about today is developing that self-awareness. And I suppose really that's what this session is about, is how can you be more self-aware in order to avoid that burnout? All right, let's go back to the presentation. Oh, okay. What motivates you and demotivates you? We got growth, achievements, helping others, novelty, new things, moving forward, chaos. Oh, I like a bit of chaos. Meeting a goal and target, chasing, fake people. I suppose that'd be demotivates. And these things are also really important because again, if your motivation isn't being met, it's going to be a lot more difficult to maintain that flow and to have these stressful situations. For instance, at a social enterprise, when times get hard, we always remember that we're helping people. But if you're in a job which doesn't help people directly, so for instance, our finance team, we literally couldn't do our job without them, but they do not get to see day to day the benefit we're doing. So we have to make sure to tell them those stories in order to keep that motivation up. When things are demotivating, when people don't say thank you. Again, I'll talk about our finance department. Quite often, they'll just do all the magic behind the scenes. No one says thanks to them. I will get loads of lovely reviews like, oh, Nat, you're amazing. You're so great, Nat. I love it. But what about the rest of the team? Without them, I wouldn't be able to do this. So you have to spread that kind of gratitude. And a lot of neurodiverse individuals, I find, feel hard done by, because they are putting that extra effort in, but people aren't aware of it. So let's say you're working in the evening, you are draining yourself out, but you don't tell other people. And, you know, eventually that does wear and grate onto you. You're like, I am working so hard, but I'm not getting any recognition. The next one we're going to look at is emotional intelligence, being aware of yours and other emotions. This is a skill which is often kind of said as a particular high spot for, say, people with ADHD, people with dyspraxia. And this is being aware of yourself and others. So, for instance, asking yourself questions like, when was the last time you cried? These are questions that you might not want to ask, but you ask them anyway. What does work-life balance mean to you? What would your younger self think of you right now? I mean, my younger self would be like, damn, how are you actually getting paid for what you do? You know, I'd probably like a cheeky guy, but these are questions which make you rethink and processing, because quite often life is so chaotic, we just kind of coast. But if you spend just a few minutes actually thinking about who you are, what you want, what your needs are, you can actually make change. I think a lot of the time we are so disillusioned by how the world works that we never think to try and change it. And I think more organizations are willing to make changes now, but we do also have to be the initiator. Is there a preference in using Android versus Apple if you are neurodivergent? Interesting. I would say no. I think each to their own. I like using Apple myself, but they both are good. So next one, intuition. And this is that unexplained yet right feeling. So if people say, I like to think from the gut, you think that's a made up thing. It's a real thing. So is your gut pretty on the spot, like, or is it way off? So sometimes when my intuition, I don't know, it's a bit dodgy. Like I'll get really wild up. Like if I get an email I'm not happy with, I'll be like, send. And then I'll be like, I shouldn't have done that. I really shouldn't have done that. So that's when my gut is way off. Other times I'm a bit spontaneous and normally good things happen because of it. So this is another thing of you just being aware of. Maybe when you're in leadership positions, you might not act on your intuition enough, or you might act on it kind of too much. And I do find as a neurodiverse person, I do tend to be an extremist, not in kind of like a terrorist way, but in a way where I'm either all in or I'm not in. You know, it's hard to find that balance and that middle ground. And that is another thing that the more you're aware of, the more you're able to mitigate it. Because ultimately, I can't stop you from being extreme in your actions, but at least being aware that you are is something you're able to consider, and hopefully even subconsciously you're able to take in. Oh, Anna says 50-50. Sometimes I'm oversensitive to things, other times I don't notice things I should. And the fact that you become aware of that, it means you actually might be able to take that into consideration. You might not be able to change that because that might just be who you are, but you can do something about it. Oh, Emma says, I think acting on impulse is different to following your intuition. Yeah, I mean, they are definitely different. I think there's overlap with that. All right, next one, logic. Logic, your technical and analytical skills. Now, every time I'm working with employers, they think every autistic person is logical. They're like, yep, let's get you in those IT jobs. And while a lot of autistic people do like IT jobs, sometimes we might be pigeonholing people. We think that's what they're good at, so they become good at it. Who knows? But analytical is like kind of very hard skills, things that you can do. So you might be like on here, I want you to rate what you're really good at. If you're really good at data analytics, 10 out of 10. If you're a really critical thinker, actually, I think it's 5 out of 5. So it'd be 5 out of 5. And you'll notice there's some things that you're really good at and some things you are not. Now, one thing that you should know about being a leader is being a leader doesn't mean you're the best at what you do. It means you know how to get the best out of other people. And I think this is actually quite motivating, because to be a good leader, you've got to know your strengths. You might be an amazing critical thinker, but not very good at data analysts. Doesn't matter. Now, a neurodiverse person, if any of you have attended my previous talks, you'll know that I always say being neurodiverse is like being a specialist, and being neurotypical, someone who is not neurodiverse, is like being a generalist. And you need both specialists and generalists to be successful. Now, most CEOs and leaders tend to be specialists. They are very good in one area, and they have other people around them who are good in the other areas. There's a very strong link between being neurodiverse and being a leader in terms of the particular styles and skills that come with it. Now, the last one I believe we're going to look at today is creativity. Now, what is creativity? Creativity, some would say, is when logic is applied to the future or an alternative reality. Now, I think this is a really interesting way to look at it. So creativity is when logic, so what you know, and you apply what you know to what might happen, or when you're creating something which doesn't exist. So if you apply, for instance, the Wright brothers, of when they kind of like first took their flight, they knew what they wanted to do, they knew what was possible, but then they had to apply it to something that hadn't been done yet. So another word, innovation. All businesses and leaders have to be innovative. They have to be very pioneering. And as people often say, creativity is one of the highest skills that most people who are ND will often cite. If you go to most neurodiverse people, or if I say what are the benefits of having a neurodiverse team, honestly, nearly 100% of the time, creativity is always the number one. But what, again, break it down. What is creativity? Creativity is logic, which everyone loves a bit of logic, applied to the future, about progressing, about moving things forward. So it's a really valuable skill set. So if anything, I hope this talk today shows you that neurodiverse people, we are already pre-built with the foundations of being a great leader. It's just about kind of unlocking it and putting those kind of foundational skills to good use. Is everyone here creative? Interesting. I would say not everyone is inherently creative, but everyone has the ability to be creative. But remember, to be creative, you've got to have the logic to begin with in order to apply it. Now, this question is, in a meeting, what percentage of brain resources would you personally allocate to these ways of thinking? So all of these are different ways of thinking that we've mentioned in one shape or a form. Have an idea of, like, when you're in a situation, how much resources do you think you personally distribute? So let's say, you know, when you go in a meeting, you spend all your energy in looking at body language, but you do not pay attention at all to innovation. That's one way. Or you might say, oh, you know, I might do 15% here, 20% there, kind of move it around. Does that statement suggest creativity is problem solving? Yes, Gemma, I would say absolutely. Because for problem solving, you need to have the logic and you need to think about the future and how you kind of might solve it, or kind of create a more abstract way of thinking. When you do maths, in many ways, maths is really abstract. It's not something you can kind of feel and touch. So you can be creative and still be very great at maths as well. I think it's a very misunderstood trait. All right, so let's see. A lot of you, if you were, how would you personally distribute? And this again comes down to empathy, about checking yourself. I can't teach you to not be yourself. I don't think that's healthy, but I can teach you to understand how your brain works in order for you to utilize that to become a leader. I hope that makes sense, because a lot of the questions I have been reading is that it's tough out there. What can I do? I think the answer is inside of you, but you do have to get that. So we've got intuition or logic is where you put most of the thinking, then out of the box solutions. So yeah, logic, that, creativity, interpersonal relations and emotions, and body language. Now, you might argue that wouldn't you want like an even balanced 25% on all of these? Yeah, but I don't think anyone's like that. Again, more generalist rather than specialists. Most leaders do tend to be all in. If you look at, like, I mean, they might not be the best examples, but like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, they are very extreme in their personality. None of them, I would say, are well-rounded. They are very spiky. And that has allowed them to be successful, for better or worse. So it's definitely not a deficit if you think you have more apples in one basket than someone else. Or is it more eggs? Maybe, never mind. Now, there's a really great quote from Alvin Toffler, who wrote the book Future Shock in the 1970s, and yet still really relevant. He said, with the rise of AI, he says, illustrative of the 21st century will not be those who can't read and write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. Now, this, I think, strengthens the case why ND people are the future. Because before, you were expected, if you could read and write, you were destined to be successful. You were destined to make money, and you would always have a job if you had the fundamental skills. And those fundamental skills often didn't come natural to people like us. But the future, well, with the rise of AI, those things aren't needed as much, though those are things that robots can do. But what can robots not do as well as us, at least yet? They can't learn, relearn, and unlearn. Now, this sort of innovation, adaptive way of thinking is definitely where we're heading. So we're in a prime position to take over. And you never know, maybe neurotypical will be the new minority, and neurodiverse will be the more majority as computers evolve and progress. Obviously, this is just pie in the sky stuff, but I do see that trend kind of gradually going towards that way. Oh, nice. I love this quote. Adaptability. Yes, Gemma, absolutely. Is ND growing because the future demands different ways of thinking to thrive? I think ND, well, we've always been here. We just haven't been utilized, or we've had to hide in the shadows. But now this demand is becoming desirable. Organizations are actively looking for it. So the fact that things like Google and other organizations want people who think different, it's because they need us. They're not doing it anymore because it's the right thing to do. If we think they're doing it because, they're being ethical, think again. They're doing it because they actively need people who are able to learn and be adaptable. So yeah, we're in a really good situation at the moment, and it looks that way to continue. Now, there's another book called Social, which is really interesting. And they said 1% of leaders score high in both analytical and empathetic skill set. 1%, really small. So when we talk about being a jack of all trades, being someone who's neurotypical, you think that's where you want to be, right? You want to be very balanced and have a little bit of here, a little bit of there, a little bit of everything. The stats say different. The stats say all the top leaders are not well balanced. For instance, people who are more analytical, there's a 14% chance of them being seen as a good leader. If you're just a real empathetic person, you might just have a 12% of being a good leader. But people who have both of those skills have a 72% of being a good leader. So you see there's like a remarkable jump. People who are just kind of like too focused in one areas tend not to have a great chance. But though 72% is really high compared to the other two, that's only 1%. So only 1% of leaders will have like double skill set, which they put like equal focus in. Hopefully that makes sense. I kind of butchered that a little bit. But you get the idea, is that what we aim for is really, really rare. So it's not something which we should beat ourselves up about. The vast majority of leaders will just be a specialist in a particular skill area, and they'll have other people around their team which can help compensate. I mean, here's a bit of a question which I think requires an open-ended answer. Why do you think so few leaders possess both skills? Why are we not very good at being a jack of all trades? Is there a reason why humans tend to have a preference towards certain styles and approaches than you'd think? Because I know, like, when you're playing like video games, you always want to like increase your stats in like nice evenly, but in real life it tends to be more in one area rather than kind of equally spread out. We promote the wrong people. I mean, often the case. Do they act with opposite forces? It's taught out of us, and certain qualities are not deemed important. I like that, and I do see that, because if you look at the school education system, are we not taught to be a jack of all trades? Are we not taught to have basic maths, English, science, everything? But as soon as we leave school, we go to college and university, and then you specialize. So it is interesting. We are brought up in our early years to be good at everything, and then we divulge. But neurodiverse people, we know very early on that we suck at everything, but we're really good in certain areas, and we tend to put all our eggs in that basket. So you do see a lot of the skills which people need in the future, we have been practicing since day one. It just wasn't appreciated in the early days. Like, if you were like me, all I did was draw in school, drawing. Waste of time, everyone said. As an adult, now I make money off of drawing, and now it's like appreciated and respected. When did that change? So it's annoying that you're made to feel dumb and stupid and less worthy, but then when it suits society, you're then valued and appreciated. And for some of us, that can affect self-esteem, which means we're less likely to apply for these leadership roles. But for some, the very few, you might be able to push past it and feel that you can still do it. But this is why when we look at like the kind of, while there aren't many ND leaders, that isn't because we're not capable. It's because we weren't given the kind of the right start. Hey, it's all about demand and supply. Empathy doesn't naturally gel with analytical thinking, and social and emotional intelligence is not focused and rather academic. People are usually good at one or another thing. I imagine they focus more on the end result and less on how they get there. This would imply less consideration. It's all about demand and supply. It's about practically both, and it has a hard opportunity to do both when there's a push towards specialization. Perceptions that some skills are more valued than others in leadership. I think that's very, very true as well. You know, if you go to your parents saying, I'm studying law, they love you. If you say, oh, I'm doing an art major, Oh, you bring shame. And both skills are absolutely valuable. You'll notice that a lot of people will do a course they love and they enjoy and go into something completely different. And personally, I think that's not a bad approach, because you learn the most important skill, as that quote told us, is to learn, relearn, and unlearn. And to be honest, if that's essentially what uni is, you learn to learn, and then you have to unlearn everything you learned because everything you learned was wrong. And people who are able to do that do have that innate advantage. And with someone with a terrible memory, I'm great at unlearning. So again, another advantage. So task switching, this is something which a lot of us struggle with. Say if you've got dyslexia or dyspraxia or even ADHD, when you have to like rapidly switch tasks, this is difficult. And I think rather than seeing this as a disadvantage, understanding why we find it difficult can actually probably help us as well in our journey to becoming a leader. It definitely helps me because often I beat myself up for not being good at things. But when you learn about the science, then you're like, well, actually, it's not natural in order to be great at these switchings. So first, let's bust a few myths. Are women better at multitasking? And I can see there being a bit of bias in this answer. Or a lot of people are saying true. I mean, I'm only going to go by the science, okay? Don't shoot the messenger, but false. It isn't true. Now, you tell me why you might think that's true or not. Is it something that has always been said? Is it because of the type of tasks which have been traditionally expected of women compared to men? Who knows? But it's not something which is kind of inherent. It is a skill that you can develop. Now, something which a lot of people don't realize is that the brain can't multitask. It has to switch really rapidly. So for instance, like left, right, left, right, left, right, it can't be left and right at the same time. It has to pick. Now, while picking, it's very, very, very fast. There's still always going to be a delay. And essentially, when the brain wants to do something, it needs to send resources. So for instance, if you're being really logical, you need to send more blood cells to be logical. And if you're thinking, well, I also know social skills, I need to spend more like kind of oxygen to that area. Every time you're doing a different task, whether it's kind of like something physical, whether it's thinking, whether it's being empathetic, it requires energy. Energy doesn't come for free. And this is another thing which kind of really hits home, that being good at one thing rather than good at everything is a very natural way of being. Our body literally isn't designed to be able to do everything at one time. Think of it like a valve, like on, off, on, off. It can like devalve quite quickly. Now, people who are neurodiverse will struggle with that rapid changing more than most. But again, this isn't the body not working correctly. This is just the body doing what it's programmed to do. All right. Anna says, from what I learned, monotasking is what we should be striving for. Otherwise, we might struggle with finishing anything. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Anna. It's multitasking isn't a kind of a goal that we should aim for because it literally goes against our biology. Oh, Gina says, and it's what exhausts me. I don't get physically tired as I do mentally tired. I feel like my brain works so hard just to do everyday things. And hopefully this makes you feel a little bit better. We've got to stop trying to swim upstream all the time and pushing our body to do things that it naturally isn't inclined to do. Now, for people who are neurotypical, hopefully you can have a bit of empathy here, because when you're trying to multitask, it's a struggle. Now, if you're neurodivergent, essentially your body is forever multitasking because it's always having to reconvert like the world in order for you to understand it better. So it does require a lot more energy. Oh, Laura says, I find it much more productive if I have one task. I can focus on opposite. I mean, I'm great that your experiences are matching up with what the science is saying. A good way of looking at it is life is like a seesaw. So let's say you've got to be, I don't know, you're multitasking. Now, when you're doing your jobs in your head, you can't be both up at the same time. One thing has to be up, one thing has to be down. And that's what's happening in the brain. So let's say you're in a room, you're in a meeting and you're writing and you're listening to someone. You're writing and you're listening to someone. You can't write and listen at the same time. And for neurodivergent people, this seesaw tends to be a lot more extreme, right? So people might say, if you're not writing notes, you're not listening. But actually, no, science doesn't check out. You're either listening or you're writing notes. And this is something which a lot of people don't appreciate, that we are listening, but our seesaw might be a bit slower, but no one seesaw is completely up. Like, imagine a seesaw where like both people are up. I don't know what that would be, but that isn't what life is like. Well, Gareth says we should multitask the simple and less important stuff, and anything gets more complicated and or more important, we should tend towards monotasking. Interesting approach. Okay, now let's focus on stress, because one of the biggest reasons that a lot of people do not take leadership positions is just how stressful it is. And stress is something which, unfortunately, people in the ND community do struggle with a great deal. So do you currently consider yourself very stressed, a little stressed, or calm? Because we've got a lot of stressed people in the room. And again, not uncommon. Being ND is stressful, not inherently, but societally. And this is something that we need to be able to deal with in order to be able to be in a leadership position. Because in leadership positions, you have to make tough decisions. So what can we do? Well, first of all, we need to understand a little bit about stress. So I want you to put a little pin on the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Oh, if you have no idea, just put it anywhere and we'll see how you get on. But the part of the brain where physical pain is detected. So when you're like in a big old scan and you're feeling physical pain, there's part of the brain that has more activation than others. But where is it? So we've literally got dots all over the place. And it is there. So it's at the front part of the brain on the side, right? So it's like about there. And this is where the kind of hub of kind of stress is located. Why do you need to know this? You don't. I think it was just interesting to know. So it gives you just to understand what part of the brain are we talking about. And it's this part of the brain that is the main place that kind of produce cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone. Now, stress is a good thing. Do not think stress is bad. Stress is what keeps us alive. Stress is a healthy thing, but too much of it is a bad thing. Too less of it, a bad thing. So it's about having that right balance. So on here, we've got some true and false questions. We got, is it true that cortisol levels rise up and down and should remain low? Is it true or false that low levels equal symptoms of stress? High levels tend to lead to illness. Stress can make you put on weight. So let's have a quick look at the answers of these. We've got true, false, true, true. So it's true that cortisol rises in the morning. So in the morning, you'll get a big boost and then it should remain low. That is healthy. So it naturally does spike and go up and down. Low levels equal symptoms of stress. No, if you have a lot of cortisol, you're stressed, okay? And this is something that you've got to kind of keep at a reasonable level. So when people talk about like blood pressure and all these things, keep it low. We've got high levels tend to lead to illness. Yep, if you have long-term stress, it eventually will kill you. Unfortunately, it will eventually. It can also make you put on weight. There's been kind of proof that if you are stressed and putting on weight, you have like a really round belly, but maybe thin arms and thin legs. So it doesn't make you put on weight in the conventional sense, but in like other areas tend to have like disproportionate amount. It's like, if you think of like the conventional banker, maybe they're really stressed or drink too much beer. I don't know. But you will see how certain kind of professions do have a certain body shape, and that can be related to the stress. Okay, Logan says, but isn't low pressure a thing that ADHDers have in general? Well, ADHD often is kind of had the distribution of kind of chemicals in the brain and how it works. So yeah, maybe not always the healthiest, but that's a talk for another day, I'd say. All right, so how do I know if I have high levels of cortisol? So we know that high levels of cortisol, bad, but how do you know if you have it? So do you experience heartburn often? That's when you get that kind of like tight feeling there where it all feels like going to collapse. Do you struggle sleeping a lot of the time? Do you often feel fatigued or kind of like headache? Do you often have that craving for sugary foods? And do you often feel anxious? Now, if these are all true for you, that's not great, because if you have, remember, these are all the ways of the body telling you, like alarm bells, that you're stressed. And stress is something which, again, is a body response to telling you this isn't sustainable. So heartburn, when like kind of it tightens. Sleep issues, unfortunately, is when the body's unable to like settle down. Fatigued, very classic. Sugary foods is another one. So quite often when the body is struggling, it will look for a quick win. Sugary foods will kind of get you through the day, but then you crash. So again, that kind of like the body is kind of seeking a really quick win. And anxiety is a very classic one. Unfortunately, a lot of you, you're looking a bit stressed, to be honest with me. But it's just about being mindful of these things and knowing that these aren't things which you should be ignoring. In order to be successful, you have to kind of be in touch with what your body is screaming out and saying it to you. Or Jeffrey just says, I'm unemployed for several years. What can exceptional individuals help with CVs, job search skills, or life purposes? I'm just horrible at those things. We can help with those things. I think it's do check out our website. We do offer like different coaching and support. So do check that out. Now, here are some positive things you can do in order to reduce stress. Maybe a couple years ago, if someone says, oh, do some exercise, do some talking, do some journaling or yoga, people will be like, yeah, that's lame. But there's so much science and evidence to say that meditation really does help. Being mindful. Now, when we talk about mindfulness, it's just about understanding yourself. Kind of again, what we've been talking about the entire day. What hopefully you've taken away is that being a leader, I would say, is pre-built in neurodiverse individuals. We have all the skill sets which a great leader requires, but the reason why we're not utilizing that potential is because of the world around us and the stress we have to deal with. So if we get stress to a manageable level, we do have the right foundations. All right, so let's see which one of you thinks is the best way to reduce stress. Exercise, nice. And heads up, you can't just exercise in the evenings. You have to incorporate it throughout your day. That is the best way for it to be effective. Now, there's a thing here in terms of like a really kind of famous way of like looking at leadership, and it's understanding that we are all different. So on this one, I want you to put a little dot or where you think you'd fit on this this scale. So for instance, we've got some leaders are really good at making sense making. Some are very visionary, like Steve Jobs. Some are really good at relating, like empathy, and others are really good at inventing. And most leaders will have a preference. It's very, very, very rare that you are a jack of all trades. So again, another thing which relates to being neurodiverse. Oh, I haven't used this one before. Now, CEOs were asked to share a secret in this interesting study by Stanford University about imposter syndrome. And another thing that neurodiverse people share with CEOs and high leadership positions is a lot of us feel like a gigantic imposter. Like we're always just kind of just getting by, cheating the system, and one day we're going to get found out. So on these, I want you to ask yourself these questions. Are they untrue for you or are they true for you? We got, I feel like I'll be found out for being a fraud. I often feel like that, I'm struggling every bloody day, but somehow I keep getting by. It's a very common feeling. I'm terrified of ending up like my father. Oh, that's a bit of a fraud, deep one. I'm destructive and I don't know why. I suppose that means mentally, but I break a lot of things as well. I have no idea how to connect with my kids. I can't sustain this pace without risking an early death. I'm paranoid that people will like to see me fail. Now, these questions are all really deep, and these are questions which people have, but they do not address. And ultimately, they lead to higher stress. And it's why most CEOs end up kind of like crumbling, or why they do seek further support from like therapy or a counselor. Now, you might not have these exact questions, but similar ones, which are kind of deep rooted, which aren't being addressed, are normally the things which can make being an ND leader more challenging often than not. Okay, rank the emotions. How much do you feel them? And why? Because we've got to listen to these emotions. Quite often when people are asked to say how they feel, for some reason, we lack the vocabulary in order to express ourselves. The English language is actually really limiting when it comes to expressing emotions. Most languages have like, I don't know, 7, 14 different types of ways of saying the word love. We only have love. And that is quite true with all the other different emotions. So always think about how you can express yourself in a way which truly represents how you're feeling. Okay, a lot of you are joy, nice, love, anger, surprise, fear, disgust. You get out of life what you put into it. And it's very, very true. You put good food in you, you're going to get good results. You put bad food in you, you're going to have bad results. So input. If you have good humor in your life, that's a good one. If you have a very simplistic life, so things that aren't overstimulating, things that aren't like frazzling the mind, I always wear plain t-shirts. I keep it simple. It means my brain can focus on other areas. If you stay well oxygenated, genuinely getting fresh air and water is so important. If you are just a tiny bit dehydrated, it genuinely infects your overall intelligence. And one annoying thing that I've noticed that a lot of ND people have is we don't have that alarm bell of when you're thirsty, or things like, I know for me, I only think I'm hungry or I'm thirsty when I'm absolutely starving or completely dehydrated, when I've got to kind of be keeping up throughout the day. Fuel and rest. So you put these good things in the brain, and the brain is able to output good emotional, good regulation, good bias suppression, task switching, problem solving, flexibility, creativity. So if you're struggling with any of these outputs, which I know some of us may be, make sure that you are fueling it with the right fuel. So kind of not like sugar honey puffs, but maybe like shreddies. I don't know. But like just try and put healthier things into the body in order to get the good results. How your brain is wired isn't the complete explanation for why you are the way you are. It is kind of like the guidebook, but ultimately it's what you fuel it with, which gives it the kind of the right stuff to go along. This is a really good analogy, which I think helps a tremendous amount with when I think about how I avoid burnout. So routines result in more cognitive power during the day. So every time you have to make a decision in life, it doesn't come for free. It costs that whatever energy. It costs something. So think you got a bucket of water. Every night you go to bed, you get a refilled with water. That's great. And every time you think about something in your day, you're drinking bits of water. But if you are tired, if you are stressed, if you aren't having your needs met, you've got lots of holes in your bucket. So while it is very, very natural for you to lose energy throughout the day, if you are losing insane amounts of energy too quickly, that is your body saying you need to fill those gaps up. So to say it in another way, your body wakes up with a bucket of cognitive resources that isn't absolute. So your energy, while it is refilled every day, it doesn't last forever. It is a finite resource. And decisions, you take little sips all day long, but when you're stressed, it's a bucket with holes in. So hopefully this explains why it's natural to get tired, but it's not natural in order to be absolutely exhausted to the point you're not able to do things. It's again another sign of your body saying help. So one way to overcome this is to practice mindfulness. And now I used to be really against mindfulness. Well, not against, but I didn't thought, oh, doesn't mean anything. But when you break it down, it's not like a religious process. It's just you asking yourself questions. How am I feeling? Am I stressed? Am I headache? Is there an ache? Is there a pain? Because your body is telling you these signals. But in the world we live in, we do not give ourselves enough time in order to ask these questions. So there's lots of studies that backed mindfulness up to say it's actually a real thing. So if you have a more relaxed brain, you tend to be more alert and able to make quick decisions. Remember how we talked about that seesaw? If you're stressed, it's a really boring seesaw. If you're relaxed, the seesaw can change really quickly. So it might feel like you're better at multitasking. Meditating can help lower cortisol levels, which we said is a bad thing, essentially cortisol stress. And just the Marines do it. And hell, if the Marines do it, why don't we all do it? So there's lots of great studies. So the next steps in terms of what I recommend you all doing, if you are ND and you want to be a better leader, it's to commit to making one change to your brain. If you literally say, I need to change everything, it's not going to work. Pick one thing and do it well, and just trying to embed that into your life. Consider one thing that will positively impact your brain of someone you work with. So this goes both ways. It might be encouraging someone to drink, help with exercise, try and do it mutually beneficial. And also think about applying neuroscience in your life, in your business. While this is important, is if you're anything like me, if someone tells me to do something, I'll be like, whatever. But if I understand it, if I really see that it's meaningful and it makes sense, I'll listen to it. I never did mindfulness because I didn't believe in it. But once I learned more about it and saw the science that backed it up, I've given it a go, and I've honestly have found it really helpful. Here is a lovely library if you want to learn more about today and see kind of the resources that went into today. This is recorded, so you will be able to check it out at a later date. Now, if you did like today and you thought, wow, I'd love to catch up, we do have our YouTube channel and you can keep up to date. We do webinars every single week. We're doing a whole series on neuroscience at the moment, so you're very welcome to check them out. And our next webinar, which is next Thursday, is Neuro-Marketing. And this is going to be looking, so we've been looking about how you can use neuroscience to be a better leader as a neurodivergent person. Next week, we're going to be learning about how you can use the way that the brain pre-thinks in order to essentially manipulate the market. Everything we see is made to manipulate our brains, to make it do things without us realizing. If you are more aware of it, we might be able to do something about it. This one is less focused on neurodiversity than the others, to be honest with you, but it still talks about how our brain can be manipulated for better or for worse. And here is our lovely contact details. If you're interested, drop us a message. On our website, we have lots of support, tips and tricks to help people. Our email is admin@exceptionalindividuals.com, or if you want to message me directly, it's nat@exceptionalindividuals.com. I really hope you enjoyed today. That was a lot of content. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. No, lovely. Bye, everyone. Look after yourselves and have a really great day.